So, we've started to create our fantasy map. We have mountains, rivers, forests, a super volcano, but no people. Yet. My name is Maclellan Moorwood, and this is the Fantasy Workbench. In this third episode of looking at our fantasy map, we're going to be deciding where those settlements are going to go and where in our world different races and civilizations are going to be living. There are so many different races and subsets in fantasy fiction that simply trying to have them all would be serious overkill. We have magic wielders, elves, goblins, trolls, dwarves, fairies, halflings, angels, demons, mermaids, giants, centaurs, nature spirits, and shades. And they are just some of the more prominent examples. Not forgetting the human characters, which tend to add a touch of relatability and familiarity to the proceedings. Like I said, trying to cram everything into your world would be ludicrously difficult for your audience to keep track of, not to mention quite unbelievable from a real-world perspective. Therefore, we need to decide first which races and civilizations are going to fit naturally into the world that we've already created. You might already have an idea of what races you want to incorporate, and that's fine too, as long as you're able to create and maintain a natural and believable harmony between your world and its inhabitants. You may have a go at creating your own unique races, like I did with Phantasms, but we will look at that in a future video. Most fantasy worlds have some elements of magic present, it being inherent with the fantasy genre. So therefore, it would be a good idea for you to have some form of race in your world that's best adept at using that magic. In my world, the Cloven Empire, magic has a set law which sets out how humans can draw magic from the earth and mould it to their own design. These people are known as mages, and in most fantasy stories are either entering their old age or are still in training, reflecting the level of discipline and practice needed to master the art of magic. In regards to their location, typical examples include the wandering loner wizard such as Gandalf, or some form of settlement where magic users can come together to train or govern. The College of Winterhold in Skyrim is an example which comes to mind, as is a certain school of witchcraft and wizardry, which definitely requires no name drop. Elves are normally ancient and graceful beings who are deeply in tune with nature and have the appearance of young and beautiful humanoids. I decided to buck this trend slightly for the Phantasm Chronicles. My main character, Aileen, is half-elf, and in this world, elves have skin the colour of cracked grey stone mottled with ferny green, black eyes with a crimson tinge, and are completely mortal. No immortality here. So, there's nothing to say you can't play with traditions to a certain extent, but it could be said that following some familiarity will help to avoid overload of new concepts to your reader. Remember, fantasy requires an awful lot of world building without adding extra complications. I decided to maintain the traditional love of nature and the keen eyesight of elves, making their homeland, a dense forest in the north of the Empire called Marrowmarsh, the natural choice. Elves are also the natural magic users in my world as well, which will come into importance when we discuss magic lore at a later episode. Elves as a whole really deserve their own episode too, just to go over the various subsets, but more on that later. Dwarves are normally the bearded crafters of a fantasy world who burrow deep into caves and mountains in search of precious jewels and metals. There's nothing to say that this needs to be the case. They could have a mine somewhere else, or may not even mine at all, although they would then risk having too much in similarity with the halflings or hobbits, the other short-statured being of fantasy. Angels and demons typically exemplify the perfect light and dark, and are often immortal, overseeing the events of the story with a certain omniscience, which can go a great way when creating a history or a religion for your world. Very rarely do they live on the same plane as your characters, but this could be something that you could incorporate. Goblins, trolls, imps, and other beings of evil are so often portrayed living in darkness, deep caves, and dungeons. I really wanted to portray goblins in a different way, and instead place their home on the shores of a frigid inland sea, the Sea of Sax, creating a dynamic of various goblin clans engaging in territory wars with each other over the years. You do you. If you want to have more traditional goblins in your world, then you might decide to have a network of tunnels or caves for them to dwell in. That is your choice. The last race that I want to talk about specifically in this episode are humans, or man as they are sometimes called. They are a race with which we have the most familiarity, the most in common, and are often the race of the main character as a result. This could be your opportunity to integrate a fully modernised, technologically advanced race of humans to your world, along with all the exciting opportunities this would bring. But it is far more common to base your humans on one or more historical civilisations. The Rohirrim being based on the Norsemen, the Men of the North in A Song of Ice and Fire having a belief system strongly resembling pagan nature worship, and the entire premise of the Percy Jackson series involving humans interacting with elements of ancient Greek and Roman mythology are just examples of this. My two main human kingdoms in the Phantasm Chronicles are based loosely on France and the Holy Roman Empire in the latter part of the Middle Ages. This decision greatly influenced my naming conventions as well, but we'll save that for a future video. And now that we have all of that covered, let's add some of them to our map. So as you can see, we've got our map that we've been working upon for the last few episodes. We've got our physical features like our forests, our mountains, our swamp area, our islands, and our volcano. Now we're going to add in those human features, those settlements and civilizations. And I thought it would be a good idea to do it by overlaying a little bit of baking parchment. I thought that means that if we decide to make any changes, we can do it nice and easily without having to start again, and just keeps our human features and our physical features separate from each other. The first thing that I knew that I really wanted was some area for magical beings in the world, wizards if you will, to convene and come together, whether that be to train up acolytes or whether that be to discuss the matters of the world. And I thought that a really good place to have that would be this volcano here, like we talked about in the last episode. I just feel that there's something inherently magical about this volcano, something that I've got a feeling about. So I'm going to label all this area as being the domain of the wizards. And I think I might have some sort of building on the side of the volcano. I like that, and it's away from the rest of the world. You've got to go around the volcano to be able to see it. You can't see it from the main continent. And I like the idea of them having some sort of onshore settlement as well in this gap between the two mountains. I'm thinking that that might be a really nice way that wizards travel to and from, whether there be some sort of ferry service or some magical way of them maybe freezing the water, or maybe something a bit more biblical like Moses parting the Red Sea. So I really like that, and I like the idea that the volcano will have some sort of element in their magic practice as well. Something else which I decided, I really wanted the elves of this world to be removed, to be slightly separate from the rest of the races. And I really liked this island here. I thought that that would be a really super place to have our elves. I like the idea, since in the Phantasm Chronicles my elves are very in tune with nature, but more into like the forests and living off the land. I like the idea of a seafaring race of elves, so an island would be the natural fit. Again, in keeping with elves, I don't think they would have many man-made shelters or structures. I like the idea of them just living off the land, so I'm not going to include too much there. Like I said in the previous episode, I think that the main human civilization will be centred around this river. If we think back to civilizations like ancient Egypt, they would often have the main bulk of their civilization based around a river because it's got good land, it's got the water, which is integral to life, and they'd be able to grow lots of super crops, especially here at the Delta. So I think that especially round here would be the bulk of their civilization, some sort of port civilization, maybe something here as well. But also, we would have civilization straddling this river as it flows towards the delta. That could be some good farmland. I like the idea of that. This forest here is quite close to the human settlement, but I feel as if I'd like to include something different in it, and I think that that would be a good place to have some form of fae or fairy culture. I like that that may end up permeating its way into human folklore because of its proximity, but its mystique as well, and the fact that it's hidden away in the forest. So I'm going to label this forest here as being the realm of the fae. Like you can see, I'm not putting too much information on this map, purely because as you start writing your story, things will change, you'll add things in. But for now, it's just important to know where different people are and what is the bare bones of their civilization. Okay, these islands here, I think are absolutely perfect for mermaids. So I think that's what I'm going to include there. So, not this island. I haven't decided what I'm going to do with this island yet. But these islands here, I think would be perfect for mermaids. I don't know whether or not they would be malicious mermaids or whether they would be good. I'm not sure yet. I haven't decided. But I like that. And I quite like this tiny little island here. I think that would be a super human outpost, maybe of a different civilization of humans. I didn't write humans down here, did I? I prefer the term humans than the term man. Traditionally, especially in texts such as Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, the term man has been used, but I much prefer the term humans. It's more inclusive. This vast, wide open area I see as being vast open plains, similar to what I've got the Primrose Prairie being in the Phantasm Chronicles. So I'd like to have these be wide open plains, which to me lend themselves perfectly to a race of peoples who really use their horses, like Rohan in Lord of the Rings. And the most famous real world civilization that had a big wide empire and they rode horses lots was the Mongol Empire. So I'm not going to come up with a name yet, that'll be next week. But I'm just going to write Mongol Empire there just to remind me. They might be slightly less civilized, more nomadic. They may have a good relationship with the humans of the river. They may not. They may have more in keeping with the elves with the proximity, or possibly the wizards. That's something that we'll need to decide. Now, the last thing that I want to add in, and I talked last week about how this forest would be perfect for stopping too much extra exploration to the north, and it would also stop extra peoples coming down into our world as well. Now, a forest, some mountains and a swamp are not necessarily going to do that all by themselves. So I would like to make this forest like a forest of shades. Ghosts, if you will, but not necessarily. A haunted forest. I like that idea. I think that would be amazing tonally for some element of my story that I've not decided yet, but I'd love to play with that element of fantasy horror that would provide. And then just the hills. These mountains here, I'm not so sure. I kind of get the feeling that they would be uninhabited. And a reason that I think that is something to do with these wizards. I think that other races wouldn't necessarily want to live too close. So I'm going to leave these mountains uninhabited. There's reason for it, but I'm not fully decided yet. But these hills here, these are going to be where we're going to have the goblins. I'm going to stick to the fantasy trope of having them living in mountains, in caves. I don't necessarily think that they're going to be antagonists. I think I'd like to avoid that stereotype, but we'll wait and see. But that is where I would like to have my different races living. I think in terms of the humans, we've got two main settlements here. Like a port settlement maybe, an agricultural settlement. And then I really like here, maybe where these two tributaries meet, and there's a confluence in the river. I like the idea of having another city there. It's quite well defended, having the mountains there and the rivers. That could maybe be a capital city of sorts for the humans. I like that. I think that that's as much as I'm going to add on for today. I might add more on in the next episode if I have some brainwaves. Leave a comment down below if you can think of anything extra that could be added onto our map. So there we have it. We're a little bit further on making our fantasy map. In the next video, we're going to be looking at starting to name some of our settlements and some of our physical features, looking at language and how that works. I'm really excited to be looking at that. Remember, as usual, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And leave a comment below. Tell us if you've been using these videos to help you create your own fantasy map. Give us some ideas about what you've been doing so far. So, until next time, my name is Maclellan Moorwood. This has been the Fantasy Workbench, and I will see you in the next chapter.